Hey guys, Kudou here. After what feels like forever, we're finally going to finish off the MLP deck building toolkit series. I saved orange for last because I feel like orange is the most underrated color, and I feel like after I do this video, more orange decks should start popping up in the metagame. For those who don't know what's going on, we're going to take a look at 5 mains, 10 friends, 10 events, and 10 resources from Orange that I feel are relevant right now and should help you either get into Orange if you're looking at it to pick up as a color, or if you already have Orange and you're looking for ways to make it more competitive for today's metagame. Couple of disclaimers before we get started. First of all, I'm not a high level player. I don't play in tournaments or events, so the metagame could end up making some of my list irrelevant. However, if you do play in events or tournaments, please leave your thoughts in the comments section below. The more information we can get out there, the better. Also, keep in mind, since I'm only looking at a small number of cards from Orange, there are going to be cards that I wanted to talk about that I didn't because I didn't have room for them. So if I don't talk about a card that you're thinking of, please feel free to leave it in the comments section below and feel free to talk about it yourself. With that out of the way, let's get straight to the mains. We'll start with Ambassador of Honesty. I feel like Ambassador of Honesty in most cases is going to be your most powerful option. It flips when you start a face-off with it. The great thing about this is it's any face-off. It doesn't specify that it's a problem face-off, so if you happen to get into a troublemaker face-off or an event face-off, something along those lines, then it still flips. After it flips, it gets Diligent too. So every time you win a face-off, including the one that you flipped for, this gets 2+1 counters. Now, this is awesome because we can build a deck around having event face-offs. If you have troublemaker face-offs, it works for those too. And you can remove a +1 counter from this card to put a +1 counter on one of your friends during your main phase. Your main collects the tokens, your main distributes the tokens. It's a very powerful strategy. Apple Vendor is another decent Applejack choice. Her start side lets you pay 2 to give another friend +2 power until the end of the turn during the score phase. You can use this to solve problems if you really need to, and if you happen to have a friend with 5 or more power at the end of your turn, you can flip this over. The great thing about this is you don't have to use its effects to get a friend with 5 or more power, it's just, in general, if you have a friend with 5 or more power, this gets to flip. Its flip side is actually really great against the meta right now. First of all, it has Stubborn, which is very important to an orange deck. We'll get more into Stubborn later, but Stubborn is really good. And during your main phase, you can retire one of your friends to look the top 3 cards of your deck and put one of the friends that you see into your hand. Orange has ways to protect itself against straight dismissal, returning to hand, and all of those kinds of effects, but it doesn't really have an answer to things like Tangled Coiffure or Frightened decks. So having something like this, where if one of your friends does become irrelevant, you can sacrifice him off to get a new friend, is actually really awesome. Princess Luna Dream Guide has a really good one-off effect if you have a deck that plays around it. Whenever you have to discard a card, you can pay 1 and then use this effect. You look at your opponent's hand, and then face up, your opponent separates their hand into 2 piles. You choose one of the piles and you get rid of it, and your opponent gets to keep the other pile. This starts a really neat mind game with your opponent because they want to get their best cards in the smallest pile possible. So you have to choose between either getting rid of a lot of their cards or getting rid of their best cards, and you can sort of play off of that. Most of the time, you just want to get rid of the most cards possible, so you'll just kind of get rid of the most cards possible. But there are some cases where you will need to get rid of some very key cards to stop your opponent from going off. Once it's flipped, though, it's just a regular 3 vanilla, so Next, we'll look at Mod. A lot of Orange players used Mod back in the day, but I think we have a lot better options now. At the end of your main phase, if you happen to have both a friend and a resource in play, then you can flip her over. It's one of the easiest flip conditions ever. It's just control a friend and a resource at the same time, which you will be able to do. And then when it's flipped, it gets +1 power for each different card type in your discard pile. For those who are confused, card type would be like a friend, an event, and a resource would give you +3 because you have a friend, an event, and a resource. So this thing can rock around with like 6 or 7 power, and for a main, that's pretty good. Mains having a lot of power is very beneficial because there's very few cards in the game that control mains. Most cards that control cards on the field say that it can only do so to a friend. So having a main that's really powerful is very, very awesome. The first friend we're going to look at is Applejack A Hard Day's Work. I want to look at this card first because it sort of exemplifies the fact that stubborn orange decks are the best kinds of orange decks you can run right now. We'll be using a lot of effects that exhaust our ponies with Stubborn, and having +2 power on a pony with Stubborn just opens up so many possibilities. Most of the cards that have us exhaust our own friends have no cost, so this is pretty much a way to stack a bunch of free power on top of our ponies after we start exhausting them for effects. And if you happen to get multiples of these in play, holy cow. Having 3 of these in play and having +6 power on all of your stubborn, exhausted friends, it's ridiculous. The next Applejack we're going to look at is Lasso Champion, and holy cow, it comes in at 4 action points for 5 power, which already makes it amazing. On top of that, you also get the effect when it comes into play, you can exhaust one of your opponent's friends, and it does not unexhaust during their ready phase as long as this card is in play. And this card is going to stay in play for a long time. So you can essentially not only get 5 power for only 4, but you can make one of your opponent's friends relatively useless. The last Applejack we're going to look at is Farm 4 Mare, and a lot of people know about this card already because it is a very popular card for almost all orange decks. Here's the thing about orange. Orange has some very, very good resources, and you'll probably be running no less than 7 or 8. With this, you can put it in play. It only has one color requirement, so if you have an orange main, this is an immediate play. It has 3 for 3 power, which is obviously good. It has Stubborn, and when you put it into play, you can look the top 5 cards of your deck and put a resource into your hand. Everything about this card is amazing. Definitely recommended it 2 or 3 in today's competitive orange decks, especially ones revolving around Stubborn. Getting off of Applejack, there's a couple of guard cards I want to look at. So the first one is Earth Pony Royal Guard, and when you put it in play at your home, you can look at your opponent's hand, choose a card from it, and discard that card. It does suck that you have to put this pony in play at home, but there are some things that we can do around it. Just getting to pay 3 action points to look at your opponent's hand and then get rid of their most key card is amazing. Just having the knowledge of what's in your opponent's hand makes this card worth its action points by itself. The other card in the color is the Royal Peacekeeper. It's 2 for 1 power, pretty high color requirement, but when it's in play, at the end of your turn, you can draw the bottom card of your deck. For anyone who's been playing for a while, this is some pretty crazy acceleration. Every single turn you get to draw 2 cards while your opponent's only drawing 1, and if you play multiple Peacekeepers, you can actually keep drawing more. Wouldn't necessarily recommend running this thing at like 3, but teching it at 1 in most orange decks is going to give you a huge boost over your opponent. Next, we're going to take a look at a couple of Modpies. I honestly don't know who she is in the show, but my god, she is very relevant in the card game. The first one we'll look at is Pet Rocks. It has Diligent 2, so every time it wins a face-off, it's going to go up by 2 power. Even better than that, during your main phase, you can sacrifice those 2+1 counters to put a 3 orange power rock friend into play. Everything about this effect is amazing. First of all, you're sacrificing 2 power to gain 3 power, and the 3 power isn't attached to you. So even if your opponent does something to control Modpie, you have that 3 power rock friend in play somewhere else that they also have to deal with. It's also a sustainable way to keep getting 3 power friends. If you just keep involving Modpie in face-offs and winning, whether they be Troublemaker face-offs, Event face-offs, Showdown face-offs, or just regular old problem face-offs, then you just keep getting 3 power friends in play. If you're using Apple Vendor Applejack, this is even more amazing because you can sacrifice those 3 power rocks off to get even more friends into your hand. This next Modpie is so dumb. It's 4 for 4. It can't be dismissed, can't be moved, and it cannot be put into your hand by your opponents. Holy cow. This card is such a nightmare in today's metagame, I don't even believe it exists. Honestly, like, you power up this one friend and you keep it on your opponent's problem the whole game, and there's not a whole lot that they can do about it. I'm not saying this card is completely invincible. It can be frightened, it can be Tangled Coiffured, it can be controlled in other ways, but honestly, it's immune to so much of the metagame that this card is still almost invincible. You can load this thing up with +1 counters or good resources and then just laugh as your opponent tries to figure out what they're going to do about it. Unless they're running Tangled Coiffure in their deck or they're running a straight up Frightened deck, there's not a whole lot of options to this card. It's just a card with like 0 answers. Or at least 0 answers that aren't incredibly situational. Next, we're going to look at Grammy Smith Jar Judger. When you confront this card's problem, you can pay 1 to have your opponent discard a card from their hand. While Stubborn is amazing, the other half of what makes Orange so good is the fact that it can control your opponent's hand so well. With a 2 for 2 power, you can just put it on a problem, solve the problem, and as long as it continues to solve the problem, you can make your opponent keep losing cards from their hand. If your opponent draws 1 card per turn and discards a card per turn, then their hand size never really goes up. Next, we'll take a look at Iron Will, another must-have card for Stubborn decks. It's 2 for 3 power with Stubborn, and opposing friends here lose and can't have abilities. Wow, that's really awesome. As soon as a card steps into Iron Will's zone, it's just a vanilla. If you can manage to get 2 of these in play, 1 at each problem, then your opponent is just playing on straight up vanilla cards. In today's metagame, most cards are relying on decent abilities that increase their abilities during face-offs, that control your fields, that get action points. So just having a straight up card that says your opponent does not get any of those effects, that can hurt a lot of decks. This card is very important right now. I'd say most orange decks are going to tech it at 1, but if you're running a Stubborn deck, then honestly I could see this being at 3, 2 at the very least. Finally, we're going to look at Big Mac and Mince Apple. A lot of Big Macs have come out since the first set, but I still hold up the very first Big Mac as the very best one. First of all, it has Stubborn. 4 power with Stubborn is just broken. And during face-offs, you can flip another card if you have this involved in the face-off. This is important because it doesn't say problem face-offs, it says just face-offs. So this is great for defeating troublemakers, it's great for going into problem face-offs, it's great for playing showdown cards, it's great for all of that. And what's even better is Orange is known for its high base powers and its great resources. So if you flip an additional card, you're going to be getting a lot of value off of that extra card that you flip. It's going to be 3 at the very least, and it could be as high as 6. Next, we're going to look at events. Orange didn't make it out so good with the events, but because their resources and friends are so good, it's kind of a neat balancer. First, we're going to look at Applejack's Epiphany. Now, as far as Epiphany cards go, this is probably one of the weakest, but it does have a couple of uses. First of all, you choose to exhaust a character, ready a character, and dismiss a resource. So chances are most of the time you're going to be exhausting a character and dismissing a resource. And the reason that I'm looking at this card is because there aren't too many things right now that they get rid of resources for a decent cost. So for this, you pay 2. You're pretty much paying 1 to dismiss one of your opponent's resources, and you're paying another 1 to exhaust one of their characters. Readying your own characters just isn't that relevant unless something is going really wrong with your Stubborn deck, or you're running a variation that doesn't really use Stubborn, which obviously I don't recommend at all. Apple Juice Break is a pretty simple card. During a face-off, you just exhaust one of your opponent's characters involved in the face-off. So cool thing about this one, it targets characters, so you can target your opponent's main if you really need to. And 2, you can pretty much use it to guarantee a win if you're using a showdown card. Especially if you play something like Hoofrasselen, like you play Hoofrasselen, which makes it so you fight one of your opponent's characters, and it's a one-on-one battle. Normally you have to choose a character that's either your same power or higher, so you're at a disadvantage. But you start the face-off, and then you play Apple Juice Break, and then your opponent can't involve their power anyway, so you're going to win no matter what. Very decent, very overlooked card. Tricking the Trickster is 1 for an immediate action that makes it so if you confront your problem and the problem is solved, and normally your friends would be sent home after the face-off, it's not sent home. It's pretty much just a small time saver. You pay 1 and you don't have to worry about moving a friend home, so it doesn't count towards your home limit at the end of the turn, and you don't have to pay the 2 to move it next turn. Situational, but a great filler card if you're looking for events to fill your deck out with. Friendly Disagreement is a pretty simple card. Pay 1 and exhaust a friend, and it loses Teamwork. Teamwork isn't that relevant right now, so that effect isn't that good. But the fact that it's 1 to exhaust a character during the main phase is really good, and it also has 5 power, so if you happen to flip it during the face-off, it's still good. Next up is Popping Corn. You're probably going to use this at the beginning of your opponent's score phase because it can really screw them over. You pay 1, and all of your opponent's characters that are a problem that you choose that have 2 or less power are exhausted. This can stop them from actually solving the problem, although keep in mind it does count yours too. The thing that makes this card great is if your opponent's main is boosted, and right now we're in a metagame where boosting your main as quickly as possible is the best way to play, then it's 3 instead of 2. So that hits a lot of very relevant targets right now, and your opponent is probably not solving that problem if you time this out correctly. The cool thing about this is if you really want to use it in a sneaky way, you can use it when your opponent is going to solve the problem anyway, to just take a bunch of their characters out of the problem face-off that's going to happen right afterwards. If you're running a proper deck with lots of stubborn, then this shouldn't even be a problem for you. Plum Tuckered Out is a simple stall card. If your opponent plays a pony or moves a pony, then you can just make that pony irrelevant. Exhausted characters are useless characters. I mean, they do still get their effects, but you know what I mean. Oh my gosh, Interplay gets on my case for making one small reference to Magic the Gathering during my tutorial video, and they go and they make a Magic the Gathering card. Dream seized. Look at a player's hand and choose a card with 3 or more printed power. That player discards that card. Regardless of where the idea for the card came from, this is a pretty amazing card that should be in every single orange deck, regardless of what kind of deck it is. Because 3 and up, that is a lot of targets. First of all, paying 1 to get to look at your opponent's hand is very powerful. It's very nice to look at your opponent's hand to see what they're running. Secondly, 3 up gets rid of a lot of very relevant friends and like every single event and resource in the game. Pretty much a guaranteed 3 of in every orange deck, I'd have to say. Tug of War is pretty awesome. It only costs 3 and you're going to be getting rid of a lot of your opponent's cards. So the cool thing about this is because you have showdown cards that just have your side fight your opponent's side, it doesn't really matter if you have a friend with lower power than one of your opponents or something like that. You just start a regular showdown, and it leads to a face-off. So already we get effects from face-off, like Diligent, for example, and we also get the ability to discard half of our opponent's hand. You see, the way this works is you start a face-off with your characters and your opponent's characters at a problem, and the loser of the face-off has to discard 1 card from their hand for each of their friends involved in the face-off. If your opponent has like 3 characters chilling somewhere and you can guarantee that you win the face-off, then your opponent can just lose 3 cards straight up. That's pretty nice, and if you're fighting against something like yellow or blue that gets a lot of characters out on the field, then your opponent is losing a lot of cards from their hand for like little to no action points. Not only that, but it has 6 power, so if you flip it during a face-off, you're still good. Whoa There Nelly is one of the cards from base set. You can play it when one of your friends has been dismissed, and you can put that friend into your hand instead. This is a neat little counter card if you know you're going to be fighting against a lot of pink or something, and it can really throw your opponent off, because if your opponent has figured out a way to get rid of one of your most powerful friends, you can just play this, put it back in your hand, and then replay it, and it's not even a problem. The fact that this card is free makes it very viable. This card, this last card we're going to be looking at, is so dumb. It is one of the dumbest cards I've ever seen in this entire game. It's a main phase events, it costs 2, and you put a number of +1 counters on one of your friends equal to that friend's power. So here's the first problem with this card. There are lots of ways to increase a pony's power during the main phase. Let's say, for example, you have a 4 power pony in play and you have Vittle Stands. You use Vittle Stands to exhaust one of your other 4 power ponies to increase that pony up to 8, and then you play Burst of Strength. That pony is now 16 for the turn, and when it loses the 4 from Vittle Stands, it'll go down to 12. If you play Burst of Strength again next turn, doing the same combo, you boost it up to 16 with Vittle Stands, and then you put 16 more +1 counters on it, so now it's 32. When it loses the 4 from Vittle Stands, it'll go down to 28. That's 2 turns of play, and that only cost you like 4 to 6 action points. Even if you don't do something that stupid with it, and you honestly just play it on something that has like 4 power, taking something that's 4 power and moving it up to 8 power, or taking something that's 5 power and moving it up to 10 power, and then not getting rid of those +1 counters at the end of the turn and having them stay permanently, holy cow, that's a problem. But it's okay. The big balancer here is you're putting all the +1 counters on one friend. So thank God they didn't make an orange friend that can't be dismissed, returned to the hand, or moved, right? It's a good thing that that card doesn't exist, right? It's a good thing they didn't make that card and then use the character in that card is artwork for this card to hint that that's what you should be using it for. Because, that would just be ridiculous. That character would hit like a rock. So a truck. That character would hit like a truck. Okay, getting onto resources, we're just immediately going to look at Vittle Stance because it is the best resource that Orange has and one of the best resources in the game, even though it's a common. The funny thing is, I don't think Interplay realized just quite how dumb this card can get when they made it a common, because if they did realize it, this card would be no less than a rare, I promise you. You play it to your home, and you can exhaust this card and one of your characters to add that character's power to another character's power until the end of the turn. Even getting off of Burst, this card is ridiculous. So here's the trick. You can either use Vittle Stands to power up one of your characters on a problem with one of your characters at home, using like Earth Pony Royal Guard or something that you don't want to move, because it's pretty much a free way to get that character's power onto the problem without actually moving the character. Or you take two big guys with Stubborn, you have one of them exhaust itself to give its power to the other dude, and because that card has Stubborn, it gives its power to scoring and the face-off anyway. So let's say, for example, you have two friends with Stubborn in play at a problem. You have one of them exhaust, give its 4 power to the other one to go up to 8 power, and it still has its regular 4 power, so it's now 12 power. You can have multiple Vittle Stands in play if you really want to, so if you have 2 Vittle Stands in play, you can do that exact same thing. You have 2 stubborn friends with 4 power each. You exhaust one of them to give its 4 power to the other one to go up to 8. You now have a friend with 4 and a friend with 8. Now you use the other Vittle Stands to exhaust the one with 8 and have it give its 8 power to the friend with 4. You now have one friend with 12 power and another friend with 8 power. Going from 8 power on a problem to 20 power on a problem by spending 4 action points. Guys, please listen to me. This is borderline busted. Highly Motivated is another card that shouldn't exist for Orange. You play it on a friend, and when the card enters play, that friend gets 2+1 counters, because of course, why wouldn't it? It goes up by 2 power for 2, that's fine. At the start of your turn, it gets a +1 counter. So every single turn, it goes up by 1 power. If it was just that effect, this card would be fine, it would be pretty balanced, but the fact that it immediately gets 2 power and then gets another 1 power every single turn makes this card absolutely insane. Can you imagine playing a Modpie like a rock with this so it goes up to 6 power, then 7, then 8, then 9, and your opponent can't dismiss it, it can't move it, it can't return it to your hand. Even if you take Modpie out of the equation, this is still a very powerful card, especially in a Stubborn deck, because you give one of your 4 power ponies with Stubborn this +2, and then you can exhaust it with Vittle Stands to give another pony +6. At the beginning of your turn, this goes up by another 1, so you can give +7, +8, +9. The Vittle Stands, it's too real. Vittle Stands, Highly Motivated, the next top tier deck. Getting onto some less broken cards. Under Arrest is a very simple way to control your opponent's friends. When it enters play, you can exhaust a character, and that character, if it has 3 or less power, it doesn't ready during the ready phase, so it still gets its effects, but it's pretty much useless when solving problems or trying to score. Varmint Barricade is decent right now against the meta because every deck seems to be running about 5 to 7 Troublemakers. When a Troublemaker is played, you can put the top card of your deck under this card, and then during your main phase, you can spend a card beneath this to move one of your characters to the problem for free. So it is a technical way to deal with Troublemakers. It's not super relevant, but if you have room for like one of these in your deck, it could be useful if you happen to go up against like Troublemaker Control or something. Sweet Apple Acres remains one of the best ways to control your opponent's hand. You play it to your home, and you can exhaust this and pay 1 to have your opponent discard 1 card from their hand. It doesn't sound like a whole lot right now, but like I said before, because your opponent draws 1 card at the beginning of their turn, if you're making them discard a card at the beginning of their turns too, you're keeping their hand size very, very low, and you can go in with something like Pony Royal Guard to make it even lower. You can use the Showdown card to make their hand even lower, and pretty much just make it so your opponent doesn't really play with a hand. And if you can get all this power onto play, and also make it so your opponent doesn't have a hand to deal with any of it, then it's pretty much GG. Oh, Appalooza. Appalooza is pretty much the answer to all of our prayers. You play it to your home, and your friends with at least 4 power can't be frightened or dismissed. Here's the secret to Frightened decks. They don't run a whole lot of things that deal with resources, and even if they do, you can run multiples of these. So pretty much you have to run these if you're going to some kind of high level tournament, because the one problem that you do have since you're using +1 counters is the fact that your opponent, if they are running Frightened, will absolutely destroy you. So this also gets rid of Modpie's weakness, because Modpie's one weakness is that it can be frightened. Well, it can also be controlled with something like Tangled Coiffure, but you get the idea. So gameplay-wise, this is something you need if you're going up against a Frightened deck. The fact that your friends can't be dismissed either is kind of good against Pink, but we weren't really too worried about that to begin with. It is a nice bonus, though. It's funny, when Hard Hat came out, nobody had a use for it. Nobody really knew what they wanted to do with Hard Hat. And now we have something that we can actually do with it. So Hard Hat is great for Stubborn decks because there's a lot of great cards that need to go in Stubborn decks that don't actually have Stubborn. If you give this to a Modpie or something, then it's actually really decent because now your Modpie has Stubborn, it can go into the Vittlestand shenanigans. If your opponent does find a way to exhaust it, then it can still give its powers. So if you happen to have a friend that needs to give its power to something and it doesn't have Stubborn, you can just give it Stubborn and you don't have to worry about being exhausted anymore. This card won't be useful for all Stubborn decks, but for a lot of them out there, you might want to consider running 1 or 2 of them. Out of Action is their basic control card. You play it on a friend, and that friend is exhausted and does not unexhaust itself during the ready phase. So it's kind of like Under Arrest, but it doesn't really have a requirement, which makes it a lot better, but it does have a little bit less power. Clipped Wings, more anti-meta. You play it on a friend, and that friend loses and can't have abilities. Pretty decent if your opponent is playing something at home that you can't touch with Iron Will. I would still recommend Iron Will over this card, but it does have 5 power. It does only cost 1, so if you have to tech in 1 or 2 to make sure that your opponent can't do something cheesy at home, then go for it. Next up is Zapapples. You can play it to your home. It has an immediate effect. You can exhaust this card and banish a card from your discard pile to give one of your friends +3 power till the end of the turn. Oh no, we have to banish a card from our discard pile. That sounds awful. We really needed the cards from our discard pile, but if we can banish one every turn and give +3 friends power, then I guess it's okay. Seriously though, every turn, banish a card, get +3 power. This card's pretty dumb too. Definitely not like Vittlestands good, but it's pretty up there. And that's it, guys. We're finally done. Can you believe it? That took forever. But that is the last of the 6 colors. So here we go, guys. I'm going to level with you, okay? Now, I know I'm going to make a lot of people real angry when I say this, but in my opinion, I believe orange is the best color in the game right now. It's funny because when the game first came out, orange had nothing. Orange was an awful color and it was nearly impossible to play. So they sort of made up for it by just making orange so obnoxiously powerful that it really doesn't have very many answers anymore. And the great thing is, it seems to be a hidden gem. Like, looking around, you really don't see a whole lot of orange decks, and I don't understand why. A lot of good players should be picking up by now that orange has the answer to pretty much everything in the metagame right now. It's got cards that stop it from being dismissed, stop it from being frightened. It's got the biggest potential for power of any aggro deck. That's what I'm trying to say. Of any aggro color in the game, orange has the potential for the highest power. It can control abilities, it can control cards from the hand, it can snipe specific cards from the hand that will cause you problems later in the game. Really, like, the one potential counter I can think of to a well-built stubborn orange deck is either a white deck or a blue deck that relies on Rainbow Dash on even ground. Control decks can't control it fast enough, it'll outspeed. Power decks are not really an issue for this because I believe this has the ability to outdo pretty much any power deck out there. Movement decks can't really work against it because moving is so easy. Really, like, it's so hard to think of a deck that counters this other than a white deck or an on even ground Rainbow Dash deck. Now, I know I'm going to get a whole bunch of people in the comments saying, oh no, here, look, I thought of all of these different ways to beat it, so it's not as good as you're saying. I'm not saying that the color is broken. I'm not saying that the color is absolutely impossible to beat, but I am saying, in my opinion, if you are looking to get into the game in a competitive way, you need to pick up orange because orange has the answers to a lot of things that are popular in the meta right now, and it has a lot of very, very hidden gems that nobody's really taking advantage of, so not a lot of people will be able to deal with you. Make a stubborn deck and put in some cards with decent hand control. You need to put in like 3 of the Earth Pony Royal Guards to control what your opponent is allowed to play and keep their hand pretty low. Use one of the Applejacks as your main, and you've got a pretty decent deck on your hand, and honestly, it's not even that expensive to build. All right, now that I've gushed for like 4 minutes, I'm going to get on to combinations. So, if anything benefits this color, I'd say it's white. If you are going to run a dual color deck, then you can run orange white. I also see orange blue as being very viable because you have a lot of great movement in blue. So if you have a really powerful Modpie or something, then you can just have it be chauffeured around by Rainbow Dash Extraordinaire. You can have it be chauffeured around by Holly Dash, all kinds of stuff in blue. I don't think it has much synergy with the control colors, pink and purple, although I can see it working. I just think it's a little unnecessary. And the one thing that's really cool about orange, it is the only color in the game that I would suggest actually running a monocolored version of. Some of the older players aren't going to know this, but they actually released a set of problem cards that only require one color to solve. So if you build a deck with just those, you can just do a straight up orange deck with no other color, and it actually makes orange even better. And it is the only color that fully benefits like that. Oh, so yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say. Thank you guys so much for sticking with me, especially if you managed to sit through all 6 of these videos. If you enjoyed this video, please leave it a like. Those things really do help us out. I know you probably have a lot to say about me gushing over orange, so leave those thoughts along with any other thoughts, comments, questions, concerns that you might have in the comments section below. And finally, subscribe to stay up to date on the latest Kudou news. It was fun, MLP fans. I don't know when the next time I'll be seeing you again is, but definitely sometime in the later future. Enjoy your card games, mares.